I'd like to introduce Pete McKenzie, who is currently studying law, political science and Mandarin at Victoria University, as well as conducting volunteering at the Wellington City Mission and as in the Army Reserves. And he's also a journalist writing on a range of topics around youth, law and social movements. So let's hear from the young voice, and hopefully he will bring that nub of hope back to us, that possibility of possibilities. So welcome, Pete.
It's always really affirming to have your CV read back to you. It's a really nice feeling. Thank you so much for welcoming me to the stage. Just first of all, can we just have another round of applause for the incredible speakers we've had so far, because I got so much of that. I talk about global citizenship a lot through my association with UNESCO, and often when I talk about it, I come up against a really prevalent myth, which is that young people are apathetic in some way. And I think it's a really important myth to address head on, because it affects how we think about global citizenship and the teaching of it. Because if we agree with that myth or buy into it, then we treat young people as empty vessels to pour learning into, as opposed to people with existing and really productive impulses to shape and grow. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the existing impulses that young people have and the existing movements that young people are leading around the country to change the society that we live in. And if anyone doubts that young people are doing that, young people have that political power, I told them to look at Aotearoa, which is this incredible example of a youth-led movement which combined years of hard political organising with this kind of supercharging of internet and social media to grab the attention of the nation and change the fate of their whenua. And it's this remarkable and deeply impactful case study of how youth-led movements around the country are changing our world. And so I want to just dig a bit deeper into that, because we see movements like that all around New Zealand. It's not just Aotearoa, it's also Generation Zero, who worked within the political system for years to single-handedly, almost, write the biggest achievement of this government's term thus far, the Zero Carbon Bill, which hopefully will be passed through Parliament. It was entirely the product of a group of young New Zealanders who researched the bill, wrote the bill, lobbied for the bill, until finally the Green Party gave in and was like, fine, we'll pass it, we'll make it a promise. It was a remarkable achievement. Similarly, the School Strike for Climate marches, which Bronwyn spoke about so eloquently, you see these tens of thousands of young people marching around the country, urging for that bill and more to be pursued. You see that in The Wait Is Over, which was a campaign last year campaigning for extra mental health funding that marched on Parliament and got it in this year's budget. The key takeaway here is that you're seeing young movements that exist and are active and are vibrant in the New Zealand political system, and that they have an impact, that they tangibly change the way that our society is structured and operates. And they do that in various different ways. I mean, there's the classic strikes that we've been seeing from the School Strike for Climate campaign, and I see one particular familiar face who's been leading that campaign, so kudos to Raven. We see that in other techniques like Generation Zero, who lobbied in smoke-filled back rooms and the Beehive and in Parliament to get the agreement of multiple different parties to a remarkable piece of legislation. We see that in Aotearoa, which is for years now conducted the kind of grassroots political organising, mainly by Panya Newton, but through all sorts of members of Soul, to build this network of activists around the country, and then activated that network by these remarkable creative pieces of work which were only possible from a generation that is entirely digitally fluent and is entirely capable of conveying a really powerful vision through social media. You see these really novel and diverse means of approaching the same goal, which is how to change the world around us. And I think that's really powerful. And one of the things I wanted to do in this speech was to show one of those videos that the Ihumātao movement and Seoul in particular put together, because I think it's a really powerful way of demonstrating just how different this generation is in the way that they go about pursuing their political goals. So this is a video that Seoul, which is the movement coordinating the Ihumātao protectors, released earlier this year.
My name is Huya.
My name is Pariamu.
This is an open letter to the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, we, the Tamariki of Ihumātao, are pleading with you to stop the crisis here. You said this is a private dispute. That is not true. The government stole the land from our tupuna. Our whānau will stay on the whenua until you sort this out.
Jacinda, you can help us. We're scared our people are getting hurt. Please act fast, protect our whenua from destruction. To everyone watching this, please email Jacinda and tell her to take immediate action. We are the kaitiaki of Ihumātao.
I tear up a little bit every time I watch that. But I think what's remarkable about it is that it draws on this history of Māori creativity, particularly in affiliation with protest moments like Bastion Point. You saw this outpouring of Māori art and film and music in response to that moment, and that's conveyed in this. And it also does it in a way that's like packaged for social media, right? This is less than a minute. It rocketed around the web when it was released. And it has a really specific ask. It tells people, email the Prime Minister, get her to step in, and we'll fix this. We haven't fixed it yet, but the Prime Minister stepped in and the Prime Minister halted the development, and you got a really tangible outcome. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that young people are organically taking prior models of political organising, where you build up these networks through the hard yards of communication and outreach. They're supercharging them using the digital fluency that they have from growing up in this moment and the kind of creative impulses that all of us have in us, but which young people in particular have learnt to channel, and they're attaching that to specific political asks which they feel passionate about. What I also find interesting when I look at this is that these groups very often operate outside the system. So of all the groups that I mentioned, only one of them operated within the parliamentary or legislative framework, which was Generation Zero. They got a great result, but almost all young movements operate outside of it. And there's a reason for that. It's because young people don't feel welcome in a neoliberal legislative framework which focuses on incremental gains at the risk of really material harms to people in the now. They don't feel satisfied with that framework. They don't feel inspired by that framework, and they feel actively repelled by that framework when it is conflict-based, when it is competition-based, when it's mainly made up of people who look like me, except 50 years older, and repels about 70% of the population. And that systemic issue is a real challenge for young or youth political engagement, and it's a real issue for global citizenship as well, because it means that we're stymieing a whole avenue of political change-making and social change-making for young people. In response, we see a really interesting approach by young movements, which is really analogous to thinkers like Raymond Coles, who advocated for the transformation of the political landscape that you find yourself in, which is that youth-led movements are collapsing back into the community. So School Strike for Climate, for example, have come up against some really significant political barriers, and so as a result they're focusing on like hyper grassroots projects where they build tree planting communities, or they build discourses in local high schools and create these communities of interest which then in the future can resonate off of each other to build a new society which operates on a very different framework. The same is true of ihu mātao, which is actively modelling, the projectors there are actively modelling a different kind of discourse, a different kind of framework for discussion and for change, in the way that they have these remarkable outpourings of creative spirit and creative energy, and of therapy is the wrong word, but in a way it is. It's the right word to convey the kind of community that is being built there. And that's a really remarkable thing as well in the framework of global citizenship, because it's something that we can learn from, channel. I've said a lot over the course of this, and I'll kind of, now that I've echoed it all out, I'll try and tie it back into something, which is that this provides us with two key focuses when we go forward into thinking about global citizenship. And the first is that we have to reform our political institutions, and we have to reform our social framework to allow these conversations to happen more easily and to have a more accessible impact. So we have to reform the kind of conflictual neoliberal political framework that prevents young people from engaging in the political system in a conventional means at the moment. And we also have to engage in we have to create a society which is focused on a partnership, cooperative tiriti model in a more general social sense, so that we can feel able to cooperate with one another in pursuit of shared goals. And that's crucial even before we get to global citizenship and the teaching of global citizenship, because we can teach it as much as we want, but if there's nowhere to go, then it becomes really dispiriting for young people. And then the second key takeaway is that we have to be expanding this conversation and expanding these opportunities, because the school strike for climate movement is remarkably impactful, but it's also remarkably white, as is Generation Zero, as is all sorts of these movements. They're remarkably white and they're remarkably privileged. And that's not, it's not a fault of the movement, but it's a fact of the movement. And in order for global citizenship to really thrive, and it's one of the virtues of the global citizenship focus of UNESCO, it has to be expanded to less privileged communities, communities that don't get the opportunity to have their voice heard, to make an impact on the world around them, to think about bigger issues because they're solely focused on survival and subsistence. And that's just not good enough. So the challenge with global citizenship, when we think about it, is that it can't just be limited to some arcane educational conversation. It can't just be limited to changing the curriculum in NCEA. It has to be integrally tied into the way that our society functions and the way that politics operates in New Zealand. And without that, it'll be entirely ineffectual. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work that UNESCO does, because I think it's absolutely focused on those challenges. Thank you.